So apparently there's a storyline that the Las Vegas Raiders superstar center Jackson Powers Johnson apparently has beef with Cameron Heyward. And apparently these guys are getting into it on social media. And, it's kind of crazy how these things kind of start, but that's like the trending story right now. If you go and search up the Las Vegas Raiders, Jackson Powers Johnson and Cameron Heyward are apparently getting into it. And I've looked into it, really not a big deal, but I do want to break down exactly kind of what's happening. Because I think there's a chance that Cameron Heyward may not have actually heard the quote via actual video, and he may have just read it because his response was, I think, a lot worse than the actual quote that Jackson Powers Johnson had to say. But, just to kind of recap and just kind of really break it down, Jackson Powers Johnson, phenomenal center, right? He's probably one of the top 2 or 3 centers in the NFL at this point. The guy's tape is absolutely incredible. But with that, we also know Cameron Heyward is a Hall of Fame player, right? The guy's been such a great player over the course of his career. He's one of the best defense tackles. Even today, I would say he's a top 5 guy at that position. The guy's a superstar. And Jackson Powers Johnson was asked on the Maxx Crosby podcast, what was your welcome to the NFL moment? He was asked that question, and he basically put it out there that my welcome to the NFL moment was going up against Cameron Heyward. I overset. I lost that rep on my own because I made a technical mistake, and he ended up beating me, and then he had some words to say to me, right? And that was kind of it. I didn't think it was too crazy. In fact, I'm going to let you guys listen into Powers Johnson talking himself. Check this out.
But what was your welcome to the NFL moment?
Ooh, that's a really good one. You got to say playing against Cam Heyward and giving up my first sack ever in my entire life. I'd have to say that.
Damn.
He didn't beat me. I beat myself. I beat myself. I overset. And he got me and said some choice words after. And I really hope he comes back for another year. That's all I'm going to say.
I love that. I love that.
He had choice words, or you had choice words?
He did.
My choice words were a couple of words, and then he said some things about some things, and I wasn't too fond of it. So I hope he comes back another year, has another great season, and we get to play him.
So there you guys have it, right? Obviously, Jackson Powers Johnson had a couple of things to say about his welcome to the NFL moment. I personally did not think that was all too bad what he had to say. You can kind of tell, he's kind of joking a little bit, but Cameron Heyward, obviously, I think he probably read the quote as opposed to actually seeing that video. And with that, he responded. He said, hey, man, I was close a lot of times. I just, I delivered the baby at that moment. Cameron Heyward was on the Not Just Football podcast. I believe this was yesterday that he was on that podcast. He said, I don't remember exactly what I had said. I tend to black out in those moments, but that wasn't the only time he got beat. I'm going to be honest. He also went in there and said, I'm going to be honest too. This is the other thing. Jackson Powers Johnson is saying this, and we don't even have him scheduled this year. That's kind of funny. So now you're talking stuff when you had all this time to even bring this up. So that's the response from Cameron Heyward, and this is kind of where we're at this moment. We don't know if Jackson Powers Johnson is going to go back and respond to this, right? But it is kind of interesting because I watched the tape, and generally speaking, Powers Johnson did a pretty good job against Cameron Heyward. Now, don't get me wrong, Heyward definitely beat him a couple of times. He definitely had the sack as well, and I'm going to show you guys the actual sack that happened as well. Now, you guys can see Jackson Powers Johnson's lined up at left guard. Cameron Heyward's lined up in that 2-eye technique. And basically, the slide on this play is going to be over towards the right. I believe that's because of the safety coming downhill and showing that he might eventually blitz. So with that, Cameron Heyward is going to end up getting lined up on Jackson Powers Johnson, right? With these 3 guys basically having to pick up the 3 guys right here as well. So you guys can actually see the play. Jackson Powers Johnson does overset on this play, and he's going to just straight up get beat, and Heyward's going to end up getting to the quarterback, and he's going to end up getting that sack. So to me, that's a really, really nice job by Heyward to be able to beat Jackson Powers Johnson. And again, what Powers Johnson is saying is I overset, right? So on this play here, Jackson Powers Johnson he's not going to step backwards, right? Because it slides to the right. And then he has the guy to the inside. So it wouldn't make sense for him to step back, especially given that the center is also stepping right. If Powers Johnson steps back, the center steps right. That's going to open up a lane right there, essentially in the A gap. So with that, Powers Johnson's going to end up oversetting, and Heyward does a really good job with the right hand, and he kind of just goes right around Jackson Powers-Johnson. And then you also see, Aiden O'Connell doesn't throw the ball. He ends up just taking the sack on that one. It's a good play right there by Cameron Heyward. You guys can see even over the course of that game, he had 3 total pressures. He had a sack, a quarterback hit, and a hurry. Pretty solid game by Cameron Heyward. But it is an interesting storyline, right? Because people are now saying, hey, Jackson Powers-Johnson's not a good football player. People are saying, hey, why would Powers-Johnson have these, this statement that he ultimately made out there? And again, I think a lot of people did not actually see the video. More so, they're probably talking about the actual quote, because it does make it seem like Powers-Johnson is saying that, hey, Cameron Heyward's not any good, right? He didn't actually beat me. I beat myself. And he basically would have never made a play if it wasn't for me making a mistake. And that's not what he's saying, right? He's just saying that was my welcome to the NFL moment. And he also says that Heyward had some words to say for him. But what we do know is that Jackson Powers-Johnson did talk about that moment specifically. And he even talked a little bit about Calais Campbell in that podcast. If you guys watched the entire podcast, when he talked about Calais Campbell and, things that happened between him and Campbell, right? He talked about, I think, a couple other players as well. And I don't think he meant anything negative about that situation. And I don't think he meant anything to the tune of Heyward's not a good football player, right? And let's also just take a step back and recognize, Jackson Powers-Johnson is going to be an elite center in the NFL. You can already see his tape. The way Jackson Powers-Johnson drops people, the way this guy gets physical and throws people, the way this guy's able to beat people's ass physically, that does not happen. You won't find more than 2 or 3 NFL players that can do that. That right there is it's a different type of player. And the thing with Jackson Powers-Johnson is he played half the season last year at a position. And again, he talked about that on the Maxx Crosby podcast as well. But with that, we should also realize that Cameron Heyward is also a great player in his own right as well, right? The guy's a future Hall of Fame player, in my opinion. Superstar player, very, very, very good. But with that, it is kind of interesting how people are now, using this storyline and actually talking negatively about Jackson Powers-Johnson. Believe it or not, if you guys go on social media, you guys read some of the comments, people are actually taking shots at Jackson Powers-Johnson. Some people are even saying, we're glad we now got Zach Frazier, who was the center that the Steelers drafted. We're glad that we took Zach Frazier over Powers-Johnson. Frazier's much better. And people are making these comments. I think Zach Frazier's a great center as well. Don't get me wrong. I think he's a top 10 guy already. I think he'll be even better as we go into this next season, but I still think Jackson Powers-Johnson's better. And that's based off of watching every single one of both of those players' snaps. Frazier will be a top 5 guy, I think, within the next 2 years. Powers-Johnson will be that as well. So they're going to be both great players. But again, it's just crazy to me that people are kind of taking this story where I don't think there's really a story. And, truth be told, Cameron Heyward also says another part of this where he's saying, hey, we don't have the Raiders on our schedule. So he's now saying he wishes, we had them, but we don't, right? The schedule's already kind of out there. But I think Jackson Powers-Johnson is more so talking about, hey, if we see this team potentially in the playoffs, right? I do think the Steelers will most likely make the playoffs, and I think the Raiders will most likely make the playoffs as well. There's a chance that, these teams are going to essentially see each other. And if they do, that's going to be the matchup that I'm going to be most excited about right there, right? Cameron Heyward, Jackson Powers-Johnson. And of course, we'll get Jackson Powers-Johnson at his natural position, which is going to be the center position. He also, again, talked about it in the Maxx Crosby podcast, why to him center is just a lot easier. If you guys want to check that out, I'll put a link down in the comments below to the podcast. To me, it's really not a storyline here, but again, it is what it is. We'll see if this continues. If Powers-Johnson potentially responds, we'll see. There's a couple more things that I actually want to talk about. So the Raiders OTAs is obviously underway, right? So I've heard a lot of really, really good things about a couple of different guys. And, OTAs doesn't always translate to the actual, when the actual pads come on, right? When training camp comes around, when preseason comes around, when weeks 1 through, whatever comes around, the Super Bowl. OTAs doesn't always translate, but sometimes it does, right? Sometimes OTAs actually does translate. And we're hearing a lot of really good things about Raiders wide receiver Dante Thornton. This time it was Vincent Bonsignore, who works for the Las Vegas Review-Journal. He's basically saying this guy's a lot better than what the general scouting report out there is, right? So if you guys don't know this, people have said, hey, Dante Thornton is not a good route runner, right? At Tennessee, he ran like 2 or 3 routes for the most part. And we've talked about this in the past as well, right? Thornton, when it comes to his route tree at Tennessee, most of his routes were slant routes, right? Like 3-4 yard in routes, skinny post routes, right? Like 10, 12, 13 yard in breaking routes. And then he ran a lot of deep routes as well on top of that, right? Just like straight deep, 9 routes, vertical, whatever, just straight deep. Those are the 2 most routes that this guy ran, right? He didn't do a lot of like, I'm going to run 15 yards and then stop and hit a dig to the inside, right? Or, hey, a lot of comeback routes. He didn't do a whole lot of different types of routes, right? Like he did 2 or 3 routes while he was at Tennessee. And that's not a knock on Thornton, but like that was a scouting report kind of coming out. And Vincent Bonsnor, again, who works for the Las Vegas Review-Journal, said that this guy's more polished than what he kind of realized. And in this article, he's essentially is going to put it out there saying Thornton was still thought to need plenty of polish to become a productive pro receiver. His college offense wasn't too sophisticated. At OTAs, however, his footwork at the line of scrimmage appeared more advanced than advertised, and his route running looked crisp. He could further along than suspected. He also threw it in there. Thornton is also taking reps as a kick returner for the Raiders. His speed and athletic ability could make him a huge factor on special teams. I did not know that. All right, that is not something I had heard, that Thornton was returning kicks as well for the Raiders. To me, this is a really, 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 really good report. This is kind of what you want to hear at this point, right? The fact that his route running looks crisp, right? The fact that he could apparently be further than what teams kind of suspected. To me, this means that there's a real chance Dante Thornton can actually have a role for the Raiders in this first season as he kind of gets into the NFL. I said this in the past, and I stick with this. If you're a wide receiver that's going to be an elite wide receiver, within the first 2 years, the flashes are there. Usually within the first year, the flashes are there. Right? If you get the playing time, the flashes are there if you're going to be like a top 5 wide receiver. Even if you're going to be like a productive wide receiver, right? A guy that plays 12 years, maybe you get like 500, 600, 700 yards a season at your very best. That's still productive. Teams will still take those type of wide receivers. If Thornton's ever going to be that guy, it's going to probably flash a little bit in his rookie year. And the fact that he looks a little bit better than what some people thought as he was kind of coming out is a good sign. And also the fact that he's returning kicks is just a whole other element to this guy's tape. We brought in Tommy Malott as well. He's a guy that some people think could be also helping the return game. Although people think he'll most likely be a punt return guy as opposed to a kick return guy. The fact that we're bringing in these rookies and these guys might actually help a little bit in the return game to me is really, really, really positive. And we'll see what Thornton can kind of do. But I love the fact that this guy's a little bit more polished than people may actually realize. And I should also just kind of throw this out there. The Raiders have Trey Tucker and they had Thornton to play that one role that we've talked about, right? In the NFL, every wide receiver has a role. You could be the slot guy, you could be the outside guy, you can be a number 1 that goes across the middle of the field and takes big hits. You could be a guy that just runs deep and runs the influence routes, right? And the influence role is something that oftentimes gets overlooked because the guy that does that influence type of routes, they're not going to have a lot of catches, right? Because you're really there to suck in the safeties. In the NFL, defenses have rules, right? And offenses understand that. So when a guy runs a, deep route and there's, 2 safeties that are split, the deep route is not going to just go like one way. Like there's rules to it as a wide receiver. You understand that, hey, you need to get this safety's attention. You got to run your deep route at an angle where you're getting in front of this guy, maybe to the inside of him. So he sees you and he runs with you. And then you'll have another wide receiver run into that area to potentially get him open, right? So the influence wide receiver is generally going to be that guy that's a little bit faster. And it's been Trey Tucker for us for 2 years. Now, it will be interesting to see if Thornton runs influence routes, if he runs routes across the field to take, like those big hits potentially, the way you would with like a Calvin Johnson type of guy or, Demaryius Thomas or one of these guys that are a little bit taller, bigger, they're physical. It will be interesting to see what Thornton kind of does as he gets to the Raiders and what his role will be with the Raiders. The fact that his route running is a little bit better than what we had expected is a positive sign. So we'll see what ends up happening. Now we got 2 more updates that I just want to quickly get into. This first one, you got Ashton Jeanty apparently showing off the hands. These were some of the highlight clips that the Raiders YouTube channel and the Raiders social media team kind of put out there. You can see Ashton Jeanty, there's like 2 or 3 different plays catching the football. Nothing crazy, but I am excited for Ashton Jeanty this season. More than I am for a lot of other players with the Raiders, right? The thing with Ashton Jeanty that I feel like sometimes people sleep on is the fact that when he was at Boise State, we know that he had all that success running the football. But the way he has success is because he's explosive. He breaks tackles. He forces people to miss. He's skilled, right? Like, he's just a really, really good player. But those skills can translate as well to the actual passing game. And I think one of the things that I've realized over the last couple of years is, guys like Alvin Kamara, guys like Christian McCaffrey, guys like Jamari Gibbs, these are guys that are just different, partly because they could catch the ball and make plays catching the football, right? They can catch the football and they can make plays in the open field. And, you get running backs like Derrick Henry, who isn't necessarily going to have those type of catches. And don't get me wrong, Derrick Henry's a great running back. But Ashton Jeanty just adds like a whole nother element to the Raiders because the guy was underutilized at Boise State, right? He didn't have a lot of actual like routes where he ran, but the guy is actually a good route runner. Like, there's plays, if you watch his tape where he lines up as a wide receiver, he runs good routes. He's fast, he's explosive. The guy's a playmaker. I'm very, very excited to watch Ashton Jeanty as he kind of develops, as he kind of gets to the Raiders, to just kind of see what this guy ends up becoming. I do hope the Raiders don't overutilize him specifically as a running back, right? Like a true running back. I hope they use I hope they use this guy the same way the Lions use Gibbs, right? Gibbs lines up in the slot sometimes and he'll go in motion, they'll hand him the football, and then the runs to the outside, right? They will throw this guy screens to the outside. They put this guy on angle routes. They put this guy on wheel routes, right? I hope the Raiders do that with Ashton Jeanty as well, because the worst thing you can do is give this guy 30 carries in between the tackles. Right, running backs that run it 30 times in between the tackles are going to break down faster than running backs that might get 30 touches, but they're touches to the outside. Right, it's different when a linebacker hits you or a defensive lineman jumps on top of you versus when a cornerback grabs onto you or maybe you run out of bounds. Right, it's different. You last longer if you're on the outside, right? Because the guys that hit you on the outside are not going to be as big. And I know it sounds like a small thing, but I really, really do hope the Raiders try to utilize this guy as much as possible, but are efficient the way they utilize him, which will also allow guys like Sincere McCormick, Raheem Mostert, and even Dylan Wabe, who we literally drafted just last year. It'll let those guys have some touches as well. McCormick was super, super efficient in the 3 games he started last year, right? He averaged probably 5.7 yards per attempt in the 3 games that he actually started. So we'll see what kind of happens as we go into this season, but I do hope the Raiders running back room this year, the touches kind of go to multiple guys, especially as the, game's kind of going on. I do have faith in Chip Kelly that he will be able to do that. I think he's a great offensive coordinator. I do think Ashton Jeanty is a lot better than people realize, especially as a guy coming out of the backfield. And then, of course, let's wrap it up. Final update that I kind of want to talk about. This one's kind of interesting because, some people think that, Christian Wilkins, the Las Vegas Raiders defensive tackle, is way too low on this list. And I kind of agree with this. So this one comes out by Trevor Sikkema, who works for PFF. He has this list of his top 10 interior guys. He has Chris Jones as his number 1 guy, Dexter Lawrence number 2, Cameron Heyward number 3, Quinnen Williams number 4, Jalen Carter, Leonard Williams, Derek Brown, DeForest Buckner, Jeffrey Simmons, and then Christian Wilkins at 10. Now, of course, Christian Wilkins missed a big part of last season. So, I wouldn't disagree that he is being listed at 10 because of the fact that he missed last season. But it is interesting nonetheless because, I don't 100% agree with this list. First and foremost, I think not having Chris Jones as your number 1 guy, if you put him at number 3, for example, the list is already off, right? I think Chris Jones is the best D tackle. However, I do think Dexter Lawrence could also be replaced with Chris Jones, right? I think Dexter Lawrence could easily be number 1 and then Chris Jones could be number 2. I would say those 2 guys are, I would do tiers. I would do tier 1, Chris Jones, Dexter Lawrence. That's my tier 1 guys, right? Chris Jones is an elite pass rusher, elite mover. Dexter Lawrence is just massive, right? There's no one that can block Dexter Lawrence. He's literally unblockable. You have to double team him on every single play, or he'll just toss whoever, is basically going up against him. Right after that, it kind of gets interesting. I don't hate Cameron Heyward, Quinnen Williams, and Jalen Carter 3 to 5. I kind of agree with that too, but I will also throw this in there. I think Christian Wilkins could easily be in that group, right? That 3 to 5 group. Now he could be on the bottom end of it. I'd be perfectly fine with that. But I find it hard to believe that Leonard Williams, Derek Brown, DeForest Buckner, and Jeffrey Simmons are better than Christian Wilkins. Maybe Jeffrey Simmons, but the other 3 guys are definitely not better than Christian Wilkins. And honestly, if you wanted to put Wilkins higher, you technically could. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, if you wanted to put him as high as like 3 or 4, you can definitely do that. To me, Christian Wilkins is one of those guys that the guy has elite movement, right? The way Chris Jones has elite movement, Christian Wilkins has that as well. Now, Christian Wilkins is younger than Chris Jones. He also hasn't had this amount of success. And then he obviously missed this past season. But I think next year, if Christian Wilkins is actually fully healthy, I think this guy's going to end up proving that he's one of the top 2 or 3 defensive tackles in the NFL. Again, he has to be healthy. The Jones fracture is obviously a concern. I think Christian Wilkins has the traits and the tools to be up there with like Chris Jones, Jalen Carter as well, right? The guys that are like elite movers, they have the pass rush technique. And then, of course, I think Christian Wilkins is an elite run defender as well. In fact, I think he's a better run defender than he is a pass rusher, at least right now. But again, he has the movement to become that guy as a pass rusher as well. Last year, one of the things you saw on this guy's tape was he's an elite football player. I know some Raider fans have been, they've talked about Christian Wilkins. They've hated on the fact that the Raiders paid him because they don't feel like it's worth it. But I'm telling you guys, man, Christian Wilkins is a different type of defensive tackle. Like, he's a top 5 guy, given that he's healthy. And again, I think the upside has not fully been reached. I think he's going to continue to get better, right? He's going to continue to get better. He's going to continue to develop. And, the fact that now he's not going to be the number 1 focus with the Raiders, right? Like, you have Maxx Crosby, you have Malcolm Koonce. To me, that's going to open things up for Christian Wilkins, right? And again, I think that's something he wasn't able to do with the Dolphins because he was oftentimes the focus for the Miami Dolphins, right? Offensive lines always knew, like, hey, we got to focus on Christian Wilkins. But it's going to be an interesting season for the Raiders. I do hope Wilkins is healthy. I don't 100% agree with this list. I do think Wilkins at 10 is way too low, but I want to know what you guys think, man. What are your guys' thoughts on the Jackson Powers Johnson story? What do you guys think about this list? How do you guys feel about Thornton, Ashton Jeanty? The Raiders could be so much better this year. They could be a lot different this year. Like, we could actually make the playoffs and actually push, depending on where some of these rookies end up kind of, developing and where they end up being in terms of the development, right? So let me know what you guys think, man. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.